The galaxy was old. It had been old for a very long time. Civilizations had risen, spread across the stars, built empires of light and knowledge, and settled into the comfortable silence of ancient power. The galactic conquered, governed at all 4,000 species bound together by treaties older than most stars. They had rules, they had order, they had peace, or at least the appearance of it. Humanity was not part of that peace, not really. They had arrived on the galactic stage only 3 centuries ago, stumbling out of their home system with crude engines and loud voices. The elder races had watched them the way one might watch a child picking up a sharp object, with mild concern and the full expectation that they would hurt themselves. Humans were given 12 colony worlds on the outer rim, a seat at the very back of the conquered assembly hall, and a clear unspoken message: sit down, be quiet, and wait your turn. Ambassador Elia Vazik had spent 6 years trying to change that. She stood in the grand chamber of the conquered, surrounded by representatives of species that had mastered faster than light travel before humanity had invented the wheel, and she made her case. She spoke about expanded trade rights. She spoke about cultural exchange. She spoke about humanity's potential to contribute to the galactic community. High Arbiter Zoran listened from his elevated platform. He was ancient even by conquered standards, a crystalline being whose body caught the light and scattered it into cold rainbows. He had governed the conquered for 9,000 years. He had seen species rise and fall like waves on a shore. Humanity was to him barely a ripple. When Vazik finished, Zoran spoke. His voice was like glass, breaking slowly. Your species is young, he said. Come back in 1,000 years. Perhaps then you will have earned the right to speak longer. The chamber was silent. A few delegates shifted uncomfortably. Most did not react at all. This was simply how things worked. The strong spoke, the weak listened. It had always been this way. Vazik swallowed her anger. She gathered her papers. She walked out of the chamber with her back straight and her jaw tight, the way she always did after these sessions. In the hallway, Thal of the Velnari was waiting for her. He was an insectoid being, tall and thin, with compound eyes that reflected everything around them. He was one of the few aliens who had shown humanity any real kindness in 300 years. I am sorry, Ambassador, he said, his voice clicking softly. They do not see what I see in your kind. And what do you see? Vazik asked, too tired to hide the bitterness in her voice. Thou considered the question. Something that worries me, he said, and something that gives me hope. I have not decided which feeling is stronger. Vazik almost smiled, almost. Far from the polished halls of the conquered, on the very edge of map space, Admiral Kalen Dritch sat in the command chair of the UEN Iron Hold and stared at a signal that should not have existed. Dritch was 57 years old. He had served in the United Earth Navy for 33 of those years. He had gray hair cut short, scar across his left eyebrow from a pirate skirmish near Colony 7, and the kind of calm that came from having seen enough trouble to know that panicking never helped. He commanded the Far Watch fleet, a collection of aging warships and patrol frigates whose job was to watch the frontier and make sure nothing interesting happened. Something interesting was happening. Run it. Again, he said. Lieutenant Mara Asai, his communications officer, played the Signal for the fourth time, it filled the bridge with a sound that none of them could quite describe. It was not music, it was not speech, it was something between a cry and a whisper, layered and complex, repeating in patterns that felt almost alive. It is not in any conquered language database. Asai said, her fingers moved across her console. It is not in any database at all, but it is structured. It is intentional. Someone is sending this. From where? Dry asked. Oi hesitated. She pulled up a star chart on the main display. A region of space blinked red. The Ara expanse. It was marked with the Conquer's highest restriction code. No entry, no exceptions. The official record said the region was empty. Barren systems, nothing of value. The signal is coming from there, Asai said. Quietly, Doctor looked at the red zone on the map. He had passed by it 100 times in his career and never thought twice about it. Empty space, that was what the record said, but the signal coming through his speakers was not empty. It was full of something that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. He opened a secure channel to Earth Command. He reported the signal. He requested permission to investigate. The response came back in 4 hours. It was short. Ignore it. The Era expanse is conquered restricted territory. Do not approach. This is not a human concern. Doctor read the message twice. He sat in silence for a long time. The signal played on, filling his bridge with that strange aching sound. He made a decision. Lieutenant Asai, he said, prep the whisper wind for a stealth run. Skeleton crew, volunteers only. Oi looked at him. Sir, Earth Command said to ignore it. I heard what they said. Doctor's eyes did not leave the star chart. I also heard that signal. Someone out there is calling for help. I am not the kind of man who ignores that. The whisper wind was a small corvette, fast, quiet, and nearly invisible to standard sensors. It slipped away from the fleet like a shadow leaving a wall. 12 volunteers crewed it. They crossed into the Era expanse and disappeared from Doctor's screens. 18 hours passed. Doctor. He sat in his chair and waited, and the signal played on and on, filling the silence with its desperate song. Then the whisper came back. It dropped out of faster than light, traveled too close to the iron hold, its engines running rough and its hull scarred by energy discharges. It had been detected, scanned, and nearly destroyed by automated defense systems that should not have existed in empty space, but it had made it back. The crew came aboard the iron hold in silence. Their faces were white, their hands were shaking. The team leader, a young sergeant named Callum Voss, stood before Admiral Dritch and tried to give his report. His voice broke twice before he managed to get the words out. There is a planet, Voss said. A Thyroman 4. It is not empty. There are billions of them, sir. Billions. They are behind energy barriers. They are thin. They are starving. Some of them are dead. They have been there for a very long time. He paused. He looked at the floor. When he looked up again, there were tears on his face. When they saw our ship, sir, they looked up. They reached out their hands toward us and they cried. They just stood there and cried. The bridge was silent. No one moved. The signal still played through the speakers. And now every person on that bridge understood what it was. It was a plea. It had been playing for 4,000 years, and no one in the entire galaxy had answered it until now. Admiral Dry stood up. He looked at his Crew, he looked at the star chart. He looked at the red zone that they conquered, said was empty. Get me a secure channel to every human colony, he said, and get me Ambassador Vazik. Galaxy is about to learn something about us that they are not going to like. Admiral Dry went to Aero, and for himself he took a single shuttle medical team and 20 Marines. He told his officers that if he did not return within 12 hours, they were to broadcast everything they had to Earth, to every colony, and to anyone who would listen. The shuttle dropped through a pale yellow sky and landed on cracked ground that had not seen rain in centuries. The air was breathable but thin and stale, as if the planet itself had been holding its breath for a very long time. Automated wardens, massive floating machines covered in conquered symbols, circled overhead like metal vultures. They scanned the shuttle, and their targeting systems locked on, but they did not fire. They were programmed to keep things in, not to keep things out. No one had ever come to Aero and 4. Before, the machines did not know what to do with visitors. Doctor stepped off the shuttle and looked at what the galaxy had hidden. The energy barriers stretched across the landscape. In every direction, shimmering walls of pale blue light that divided the planet into enormous prison blocks. Behind those walls, the Atherants lived or existed. Living was too generous a word. For what Dritch saw, they were small, barely reaching a human's chest. Their skin was translucent, and beneath it, faint patterns of light pulsed slowly, like a heartbeat made visible. Their eyes were large and dark and wet. They were thin. Many of them were so thin that their bones pressed against their skin like something trying to escape. From the inside, they stood in groups, huddled together, watching the humans through the barrier with expressions that Doctor would never forget for as long as he lived. They were not afraid. They were not angry. They were hopeful, and the hope in their eyes was the most painful thing had ever seen, because it was the hope of people who had been disappointed so many times that they no longer believed in what they were feeling. The medical team approached the barrier. A Marine technician found a control node, and after 20 minutes of work managed to create a small opening. The Ons did not rush through. They stood still, staring at the gap as if it might be a trick. Then an old one came forward. She moved slowly, each step careful and deliberate, as if walking was something she had to remember how to do. She was smaller than the others and older than anyone could guess. The light beneath her skin was faint, barely flickering. She stopped at the opening and looked up at Doctor. Her name, they would learn later, was Saya. She was an elder, one of the last who remembered the time before the barriers. She did not speak, not with words. Instead, she reached out one thin hand and placed it against Doctor's chest, just above his heart, and then he felt it. It came like a wave, not violent, not forced, but immense and deep and impossible to resist. Saya shared what her people had carried for 4,000 years. The loneliness came first. It was not the loneliness of a single person, but of an entire species, billions of souls, cut off from every other living thing in the universe, left to wither in silence. Then came the hunger, not just for food, though that was there too, but for contact, for connection, for someone to simply acknowledge that they existed. Then the grief, layer upon layer of it. Generations of Ons born inside the barriers who never saw an open sky, who lived and died without ever knowing what freedom felt like, and beneath it all, There was the memory, Saya shared it. Clearly the way one might share a scar. 4,000 years ago, the Atherans had stood before the conquered and begged. They had not fought, they had not threatened. They had simply asked to be left in peace. They had a gift, the ability to share emotions across species, to make any being feel what another felt. They had offered this gift freely, believing it could bring the galaxy closer together. The conquered had called it a weapon, a threat to sovereign thought. The vote was unanimous. The Atherans were to be removed from galactic society and contained forever. The last thing Saya shared was the plea itself. The Aarons had asked for mercy, just that. One word, one simple request, and the conquered answer had been delivered by Zoran himself in a voice like cracking ice. Mercy is inefficient. Doctor fell to his knees. He was not a man who cried easily. He had buried friends. He had fought battles. He had carried the weight of command for decades without breaking, but the weight of what Saya gave him broke something open that he did not know was sealed shut around him. His Marines, men and women trained to endure anything, wept openly. The medics stood frozen, tears running down their faces. No one spoke. There were no words large enough for what they were feeling. Saya looked down at Doctor. She pulled her hand away. The wave receded. But the memory of it did not. It would never go away entirely. None of them would ever be quite the same. We asked them for mercy once, Saya said. Her voice was soft and cracked with age, and she spoke in a language that the translation systems barely recognized. They said mercy was inefficient. She paused. Her dark eyes searched Dry's face, looking for something she was afraid she would not find. Will you be different? Dritch looked at her. He looked at the barriers stretching to the horizon. He looked at the billions of hollow faces watching from behind the light. He thought about his orders. He thought about Earth Command telling him this was not a human concern. Yes, he said. His voice was rough, but it did not shake. I will be different. He stood up. He turned to Lieutenant Asai, who was standing nearby with tears still wet on her face and her recording equipment running. She had captured everything. The barriers, the Atherans, Say's plea. All of it. Send it. Dry said. Open channel, unencrypted, every human frequency, every colony, every station, every ship. Let them see what I just saw. Sir Asai said. The conquered will intercept it. Good. Dry said. Let them. The broadcast went out at the speed of light and then faster, carried by every relay and communication satellite humanity had ever built. It reached Earth in minutes. It reached the colonies in hours. It reached the conquered in moments, and in the grand chamber of the galactic conquered, Ambassador Elia Vazik watched it on her personal display. She watched the barriers. She watched the Atherans. She watched Saya place her hand on Dry's chest, and even through a screen, even through thousands of light years, she felt the echo of what Saya had shared. It was faint, like hearing someone scream from very far away, but it was enough. Vazik stood up from her seat. She walked to the center of the chamber floor. She had not been given permission to speak. She did not care. I have a question for this assembly, she said. Her voice was steady, but there was something beneath it that made several delegates lean back in their seats. I have just received footage from the Era Expanse. The region you told us was empty. It is not empty. There are billions of living beings imprisoned there. They have been there for 4,000 years. I want to know why. The chamber shifted, delegates exchanged glances. Some looked uncomfortable, some looked guilty. High Arbiter Zoran looked down from his platform with eyes like frozen light. That matter was decided long before your species existed, Zoran said. It is not your concern, it was never your concern. Know your place. Ambassador. Vasek stared at him. The chamber was very quiet. Every delegate, every aide, every observer watched the small human woman standing alone on the floor, looking up at the most powerful being in the galaxy. You will regret those words, she said. She turned and walked out. She did not look back. On Earth, the broadcast played on every screen, in homes, in offices, in schools, in military bases, in hospitals, in bars and restaurants and ships and stations. People watched. They saw the barriers. They saw the hollow faces. They saw Seiya's plea. They felt even through the distance of a recording the ghost of what she had shared, and something changed. It was not sudden. It was not loud. It was more like a crack forming in a dam, small at first, then spreading, then widening until the pressure behind it became too great to hold. Humanity had its own history of cages, its own history of peoples locked away, starved, forgotten, left to die while the powerful looked the other way. That history was taught in every school and carved into every memorial on Earth, and with it came a promise that every human child learned before they learned to read. Never again. Those two words had been spoken after humanity's darkest hours. They had been carved in stone and written in blood. They were not a slogan. They were not a policy. They were a wound that had never fully healed. And now, watching Seiya's plea, that wound was torn wide open across human space. The grief turned to anger, and the anger turned to something the galaxy had never seen before. The galactic conquered expected humanity to apologize. That was the standard procedure. A minor species violates restricted space, receives a formal reprimand, issues a statement of regret, and life continues. It had happened dozens of times over the millennia. The pattern was as old as the conquered itself. The weak bow the strong, except the bow. Order is maintained. The conquered diplomatic office sent the formal reprimand to Earth within hours of the broadcast. It was written in the cold, precise language that the elder races used when speaking to those they considered beneath them. It demanded a full withdrawal from the era expanse. It demanded the destruction of all copies of the broadcast. It demanded a public apology from Earth's government. And it demanded that Admiral Dritch be turned over to conquered authorities for trial. The response came back from Earth in 6 hours. It was 4 words long. Come and take him. In the Conqueror's analysis division, a team of alien statisticians studied humanity's reaction with growing confusion. Their models predicted submission. Every variable pointed to it. Humanity was small. Humanity was weak. Humanity depended on conquered trade routes and technology agreements. A rational species would calculate the cost of resistance, find it too high, and surrender. The analysts ran their models again and again. The result was always the same: 98.7% chance of human compliance. They did not understand that they were measuring the wrong thing. They were measuring logic. What was happening on Earth and across every human colony had nothing to do with logic. The Earth Union Parliament convened an emergency session. Every representative from every nation and territory on Earth was present. The colonial delegates attended. By live feed, the session was broadcast publicly because every human alive demanded to watch it. The debate lasted 9 hours. It was loud and angry and passionate the way human politics always was. Representatives argued, they shouted, they pounded their desks, they disagreed on nearly everything: funding, strategy, timeline, leadership. This was normal. Humans had never been good at agreeing with each other, but when the vote came, it was unanimous. The ERA resolution passed without a single objection. Its language was simple, written in the plain words that humans used when they meant what they said. Humanity will not withdraw from the ERA expanse. Humanity will free the Atheran people. Any force used to prevent this will be answered with force. This is not negotiable. The colonial governments ratified it. Within hours, every single one, colonies that had spent decades arguing with Earth about taxes and trade and territorial rights, set aside every grievance overnight. Political rivals who had not spoken to each other in years stood side by side and signed the same document. 72 hours after the broadcast, every human government, faction, corporation, and military force in existence was unified behind a single purpose. It was the fastest and most complete political unification in human history, and it terrified every alien intelligence analyst who understood what it meant. Thrich of the Nari understood. He had studied humanity for 200 years. He had read their history. He had watched their wars. He knew things about them that most of the galaxy had never bothered to learn. He requested an emergency audience with the conquered council. Zoran granted it, more out of curiosity than concern. Thou stood on the chamber floor and spoke carefully. I must warn this council, he said. You are making a mistake that cannot be undone. I have studied humanity longer than any other scholar in the conquered. I know what they are. They are not naturally aggressive. They are not conquerors by instinct. Most of the time they argue among themselves and accomplish very little. He paused and his compound eyes swept across the delegates. But there is a condition, rare, dangerous, and absolute, under which they transform into something else entirely. When humans believe they are fighting for something righteous, when they believe that they stand between the helpless and the powerful, they become a force that does not calculate cost. They do not weigh odds. They do not measure acceptable losses. They simply do not stop, not until the thing is done or they are all dead. The chamber was quiet. You have given them a cause, continued. You have given them billions of innocent prisoners and told them to look away. That is the one thing you must never ask a human to do. You have awakened something, and I do not believe you can put it back to sleep. Zoran listened. His crystalline body caught the light and threw it back in sharp angles. You overestimate them, he said. They are a young species with a small fleet and limited technology. They will see reason when they face our strength. Thalrich looked at the high orbiter for a long moment. I hope you are right, he said. For all our sakes across human space. The mobilization had already begun. It started in the shipyards. Every military dockyard switched to emergency production. Civilian shipyards, companies that built cargo haulers and passenger liners and mining vessels, received government contracts and began producing warships. The designs were not elegant, they were not sophisticated. They were built fast and built tough, with heavy armor and oversized weapons, bolted onto frames that were never designed for war. Engineers worked in shifts around the clock, sleeping in their workshops, eating at their stations. The militaries emptied. Every graduate, every cadet old enough to serve was assigned to a ship. Then the volunteers came, retired officers returned to duty, merchant sailors signed up, miners and factory workers, and teachers and scientists walked into recruitment offices and said the same thing. Where do you need me? The research divisions pivoted overnight. Scientists who had spent decades studying theoretical physics and abstract mathematics turned their minds to weapons, shields, and engine modifications. They did not have time to match conquered technology. They did not try. Instead, they found ways to squeeze more power from human systems, faster engines, harder-hitting weapons, armor that could absorb more punishment before failing. On Colony 9, a retired engineer named Petra Holtz designed a new torpedo guidance system in her kitchen using parts from a broken mining drone. She sent the blueprints to the Navy. They put it into production within a week. On Colony 3, a 16-year-old student named David Chin wrote a software patch that improved targeting accuracy by 11%. He sent it from his school computer. It was installed across the fleet within days. On Earth, a 91-year-old woman named Grace Adamy, the last living veteran of humanity's final ground war, a conflict that had ended 80 years ago, put on her old uniform, walked to the nearest military base and said she was reporting for duty. They told her she was too old. She told them she could still teach young soldiers how to fight. They gave her a classroom. It was full. Within the hour, this was what the conquered models could not measure. It was not strategy. It was not resources. It was not technology. It was the simple, terrifying fact that when humanity decided something mattered, every single human became a soldier, whether they wore a uniform or not. Admiral was given command of the Liberation Fleet. He stood on the bridge of the Iron Hold and looked at what humanity had built in barely 3 weeks. It was not pretty. Sleek warships flew alongside converted freighters with weapon mounts welded to their hulls. Patrol boats flew next to passenger liners that had been stripped and armored. Some ships were so new that their identification codes had not been entered into the naval registry yet. It was the most beautiful thing had ever seen. He addressed the fleet on an open channel. His voice was calm and steady, the way it always was. The conquered told us to know our place. He said they were right. We do know our place. Our place is between the helpless and those who would harm them. It always has been. That is who we are. Today we prove it. The fleet jumped. 412 ships carrying the anger and hope of an entire species crossed into the aero expanse and emerged on the other side to find the conquered waiting for them. The enforcement armada filled the space. Ahead, 6,000 warships from 12 elder species arranged in perfect formation. Each one was larger, faster, and more powerful than anything in the human fleet. Their shields glowed with energy that human science could barely understand. Their weapons could crack planets. The comm channels opened. The conquered commander, an enormous armored being called Overseer Rathon, spoke with a voice that vibrated through every Frequency, human fleet you are in. Violation of galactic conquered law. Power down your weapons and surrender. Your commander, this is your only warning. The bridge of the iron hold was silent. Every officer looked at Doctor. He sat in his command chair looking at the wall of warships ahead of him, and for a moment he thought about Saya. He thought about her hand on his chest. He thought about 4,000 years of silence. He opened the channel. No, he said. First shot came from the Concord. Overseer Rathon gave the order with the casual confidence of someone stepping on an insect. A volley of plasma fire erupted from the front line of the enforcement armada, enough energy to melt a small moon. It crossed the gap between the two fleets in seconds, aimed at the center of the human formation. The human ships scattered, not in panic, in purpose. The fleet split into dozens of smaller groups that spread in every direction like seeds thrown into wind. It was a tactic the conquered had never seen, because no species in galactic history had ever been reckless enough to break formation in the opening seconds of a battle against a superior force. But that was the point. The conquered fought by doctrine. Their formations were precise, their tactics refined over millennia, their command structure layered and methodical. Every decision passed through 3 levels of authority. Before an order was given, it was efficient, it was proven, it was slow. Human captains made their own decisions. They had been given one order from Doctor. Before the battle, get to the planet, do whatever you have to do, do not wait for permission. And so they did not wait. They attacked from every angle at once, pouring fire into the conquered formation with a ferocity that turned the battle from an orderly engagement into chaos within minutes. The conquered ships absorbed the damage easily at first. Their shields were centuries beyond anything humanity could produce. Human weapons hit them like rain hitting stone, noticeable but not dangerous. But the rain did not stop. A conquered cruiser destroyed a human frigate with a single shot. The 2 ships flanking the frigate closed the gap and kept firing. Conquered battleship crippled a human destroyer, tearing it nearly in half. The destroyer's surviving crew are rooted. Every system, life support, gravity, lighting to the forward guns and fired until their reactor went critical. Another conquered ship shattered a human corvette. The corvette's escape pods launched and the crew inside them used the pod's emergency thrusters to ram their burning wreck into the nearest enemy vessel. The conquered commanders began to notice something wrong with their projections. They had calculated humanity's breaking point. Every species had won the percentage of losses at which a fleet would retreat to preserve itself. For most species it was around 15%. For the most stubborn 30%. The human fleet had lost 18% of its ships in the first hour. And it was not slowing down, it was accelerating. Every ship lost seemed to make the survivors fight harder. Overseer Rathon ordered a focused assault on the human flagship. 12 conquered warships converged on the iron hold, hammering it with concentrated fire. The iron hold shields failed. Within minutes, its hull cracked open in 3 places. Fires burned through its lower decks. A third of its crew was dead or wounded. Doctor. He ordered the iron hold to push forward, directly into the teeth of the assault, using its damaged bulk as a battering ram to create a gap in the conquered formation. Behind him, a wedge of human ships poured through the opening, driving toward Athero Roman 4 like a spear through a wound. What are they doing? Arthon asked his tactical officer. The question was genuine. He did not understand. They are dying, Overseer, the tactical officer replied, but they are not stopping. The strike group that broke through was led by the UEN Defiance destroyer, so new that its crew had been aboard for less than a week. Its captain, a woman named Ren Takahashi, had been a cargo ship pilot 6 weeks ago. She flew the Defiance through the gap in the conquered line with the calm precision of someone who had decided that fear was a luxury she could not afford. Behind the Defiance, 11 more ships followed. 3 were destroyed before they cleared the formation. The remaining 8 pressed on toward the planet. Conquered pursuit ships gave chase faster and stronger, picking off the human vessels one by one. By the time the strike group reached Athero Roman 4, only 4 ships remained. Defiance was one of them. They entered the planet's atmosphere under fire. Conquered orbital platforms, ancient automated weapons, targeted them as they descended. One ship was hit and broke apart, its burning pieces falling across the landscape like meteors. The 3 survivors landed hard, their holes scorched and cracked in a clearing near the largest concentration of energy barriers. Lieutenant Mara Ase was on the ground. She had volunteered for the landing team because she had been there the first time and she had promised herself she would come back. She led 200 Marines out of the ships and into a landscape that looked like the end of the world. Automated wardens attacked immediately. They were machines built to maintain the prison, and they had weapons that could cut through human armor like paper. The Marines fought them with everything they had: rifles, grenades, shoulder-mounted rockets, and when those ran out with their hands and their fury, Ase reached the first barrier control node. The technology was alien and ancient, designed by species that no longer existed. The Marine technicians worked on it while their comrades held back the wardens. It took 40 minutes and 11 lives to crack the first barrier. When it fell, the shimmering wall of light flickered and vanished, and the Ons behind it stood blinking in the open air. They did not run, they stood perfectly still as if they could not believe what they were seeing. Then, slowly they began to walk forward. Some of them fell because their legs were too weak to carry them. Marines picked them up and carried them, cradling the small, translucent bodies like children. Ase's team moved to the second barrier, then the third. Each one cost lives, each one freed thousands. In orbit, the main battle raged on. The human fleet had lost nearly 40% of its ships. The Conquered had expected this to end the fight. It did not end the fight. Human ships with shattered hulls and failing systems continued to engage. Crews that should have abandoned ship instead patched what they could and turned back toward the enemy. Medical bays became secondary command centers. Cooks and engineers picked up weapons and joined damage control teams. A Conquered admiral named Sithara, who commanded a wing of the enforcement armada, would later record her observations for the Conquered historical archive. Her words would become famous across the galaxy. We calculated their breaking point. We had models, we had data, we had 4,000 years of experience with every species we had ever encountered. We were certain they would break. They did not. I do not believe they have one. I do not believe such a thing exists in them. I have Fought many enemies in my career, I have. Never fought anything like this, I hope. I never do again, on the surface of. Athero Roman 4, Saya watched the humans. Die for her people, she watched them. Bleed and burn and fall, and she watched them get up again and keep going. She had lived for longer than any aim. Should have lived, sustained by a will that even she did not fully understand. Waiting for something she had stopped. Believing would come, it had come, and it was terrible and beautiful and heartbreaking all at once. She made a decision. It was the one thing she had sworn she would never do again. The last time the Ons had used their gift, the galaxy had punished them for it. They had learned to keep their feelings locked inside, to suffer in silence, to never share what they carried. But the humans were dying. They were dying for people they had never met, for a cause that gave them nothing, for a promise made by strangers 4,000 years ago. And Saya decided that if humans could sacrifice everything for her people, then she could do the one thing that terrified her. She broadcast. Not a plea this time, not a whisper. She opened herself completely and sent everything she had, every memory, every feeling, every moment of 4,000 years of imprisonment outward. The signal was enormous. It swept through the atmosphere, through the void, through the holes of every ship in the system. It was not aimed at humans. It was aimed at the conquered fleet, every alien soldier, every pilot, every commander felt it hit them like a wall. 4,000 years of suffering poured into their minds in an instant. The loneliness, the hunger, the children born in cages who never saw the sky, the elders who died reaching toward stars they could not touch. The plea for mercy that was answered with silence. The conquered fleet shattered, not from weapons fire, but from the inside out. Crews dropped their controls and screamed. Commanders collapsed at their stations. Pilots wept so hard they could not see their instruments. Ships drifted out of formation, their crews unable to function, unable to do anything except feel what the Ons had felt. Some of them turned their ships around and left. Some simply stopped fighting and sat in silence. A few opened channels to the human fleet and said through broken voices that they were sorry, snorts, that they had not known, that they should have known. The battle was over. But in the conquered capital, far from the chaos, High Arbiter Zoran watched it, all with eyes that felt nothing. His crystalline species had no emotions for Saya to reach. He saw his armada crumble, and he felt no grief. He felt no guilt. He felt only the cold recognition that his authority was being challenged and that this could not be allowed. He reached beneath his platform and activated a system that had not been used in 8,000 years, the purification protocol, an ancient weapon hidden inside the Era System star, designed to sterilize everything within the system. In a single blast, he entered the activation code. A timer appeared on his screen. 6 hours. In 6 hours, the star would tear itself apart, and everything in the system, the planet, the Ons, the humans, and his own broken fleet would cease to exist. Zoran would rather destroy it all than allow the conquered's authority to crack. Order would be maintained, no matter the cost. The star began to change. It was subtle. At first, a slight increase in radiation, a faint pulse deep within the core that the system's sensors barely registered, but Admiral Dry's science officer caught it. She ran the readings 3 times, then a 4th, hopping. She Was wrong, she was not wrong. There is something inside the star, she said. An artificial structure, it is charging. Based on the energy curve, it will reach critical output in approximately 5 hours and 40 minutes. When it does, it will cause the star to go supernova. Everything in this system will be destroyed. Doctor stood on the shattered bridge of the iron hold. Half his displays were dead. The deck beneath his feet was buckled and stained with blood. He had lost nearly half his fleet. His ship was barely holding together. His people were exhausted and wounded and running on nothing but willpower. And now the enemy had decided to kill everything rather than lose. He was not surprised. He had read enough history to know that tyrants always chose destruction over defeat. It was the final move of every dictator, every empire, every system of power that believed its own authority was more important than the lives it governed. Burn it all down rather than let someone else build something better. Can we reach it? Dritch asked. The science officer studied her readings. The weapon is embedded deep in the star's outer layer. A ship would need to enter the corona to get close enough to destroy it. The heat and radiation at that depth would be fatal. No shield we have could survive it for more than a few minutes. A few minutes might be enough, Ditch said. He looked at his fleet. What remained of it? Battered ships crewed by battered people still holding their positions, still refusing to leave. He opened a channel to every ship. This is dry. There is a weapon inside the star. It is going to destroy the system in less than 6 hours. I need volunteers to fly into the corona and kill it. I will not lie to you. This is a one-way trip. No one who goes in is coming back out. The channel was silent for 3 seconds. Then every surviving ship in the fleet volunteered. Dritch closed his eyes. He allowed himself one breath. Then he opened them and began selecting ships. Far from the battle in the polished halls of the conquered capital, Ambassador Elia Vazik was running out of time. She had received the intelligence about the purification protocol from a Nari spy network that Thalrich had quietly activated. She knew what Zoran had done. She knew the clock was ticking. Diplomacy had failed in the Grand Chamber. It had failed at the official level, the formal level, the level of speeches and votes and proper procedure. But Vazik had not survived 6 years in alien politics by playing only by the rules. She went door to door. She walked to the Velnari embassy first because she knew Thalik would say yes. He did. He formally withdrew his species from the conquered and pledged full support to humanity. It was the first time in the conquered's history that a member species had left voluntarily. Then Vazik went to the Danari, a quiet, scholarly species who had always seemed uncomfortable with the conquered. Methods, she showed them the battle. Footage, she showed them Saya's. Broadcast, she showed them the data on the purification protocol that Zoran was willing to murder his own fleet to maintain control. The Danari ambassador stared at the data for a long time. We knew about the Atharants, she said. Quietly, we have always known. We voted for their imprisonment 4,000 years ago. Because we were afraid, we have been ashamed of it ever since. Then stop being ashamed, Vazik said. Start being brave. The Danari withdrew from the conquered within the hour. Vazik moved to the next embassy, and the next. She did not give grand speeches. She did not threaten or beg. She simply showed them the truth and asked one question, "Is this who you are?" Some said no immediately, some argued, some wept, some refused to look at the footage and shut their doors, but one by one species began to break away. Torvani left, the Ashali left, the Yundari, who had been conquered members for 7,000 years, sent a single message to Zoram that read, "We are done." Within 3 hours, 30 species had abandoned the conquered. The alliance that had governed the galaxy for millennia was cracking apart, and at the center of the crack stood a single human woman who had been told to know her place. In the era system, DRI led the assault. On the star, 12 ships flew toward the sun. They accelerated past the point of safe return and kept going. Radiation climbed, the heat climbed. Shields flared and sparked and began to fail. The ships pushed deeper. On the surface of Aero Roman 4, Lieutenant Os worked with a team of engineers and Atheran elders to build something desperate. The Aarons, despite their weakened state, understood the weapon. Inside their star, they had felt it activate. They knew its frequency, its rhythm, its location. Saya provided the coordinates from memory. The weapon had been installed while her people watched. A final warning of what would happen if they ever tried to resist. Asa jury-rigged a ground-based transmission array from the wreckage of a landing shuttle and the remains of a barrier control node. It was ugly and fragile and held together with cable ties and hope, but it worked. She fit the targeting data from the Aarons into the array and broadcast it directly to the ships approaching the star. "I have the target," Captain Ren Takahashi said. From the bridge of the Defiance, her ship was burning. The whole temperature was beyond anything the sensors could accurately measure. Her crew was still at their stations. They had stopped checking the survival estimates an hour ago because the numbers had all dropped to zero. The Defiance pushed deeper into the corona around it. The other ships fell away one by one, shields collapsing, holes melting, reactors failing. 2 ships exploded, 3 more lost power and drifted into the fire. The Defiance flew through their debris. Takahashi could see the weapon now. It was enormous, a conquered construct, buried in the star's plasma like a nail driven into flesh. It pulsed with gathering energy, building toward the moment when it would tear the star apart and kill everything. "All forward weapons," Takahashi said. "Everything we have fire." The Defiance unleashed every torpedo, every missile, every energy weapon it carried. The barrage hit the conquered construct and punched through its outer shell. The weapon cracked, energy spilled out of it in wild, uncontrolled bursts, but it was not dead. The weapon was still charging, still building toward detonation. Again, Takahashi said, "The weapons." Officer shook his head. "We are empty." "Captain, everything is spent." Takahashi looked at the weapon. She looked at her crew. She thought about the people on the planet below, humans and Ons, together looking up at a sky they might never see again. "Then we are the weapon." She said, "Helm, take us in." The helmsman did not hesitate. The Defiance surged forward, its dying engine screaming, and struck the conquered construct at full speed. The impact was catastrophic. The construct shattered. The weapon's energy, no longer contained, tore itself apart in a cascade of fire that lit up the entire system. The Defiance was consumed in the blast. There were no survivors. In the Era system, the star shuddered and then stabilized. The weapon was Gone, the supernova would not come. Planet was safe. On the surface, Saya felt the weapon die. She felt it the way. She felt everything as a tremor in the fabric of emotion that connected all living things. She also felt the Defiance and its crew vanished from that fabric, their lives snuffed out in an instant. She lowered her head and wept for people whose names she would never know. In the conquered capital, Zoran watched the weapon's signal go dark. He sat in his chamber alone, his crystalline body perfectly still. The purification protocol had failed. His armada was broken. 30 of his member species had abandoned him. The structure he had maintained for 9,000 years was falling apart around him. The door to his chamber opened. Ambassador Vazik walked in, followed by Thal and representatives of the 30 species that had broken away. They filled the room with a silence that was heavier than any sound. "What do you want?" Zoran asked. His voice was flat, emotionless. Even now at the end he felt nothing. "That is always your question," Vazik said. She walked forward until she stood directly below his platform, looking up at him the way she had looked up at him so many times before. But she was not the same woman who had stood in this chamber and swallowed her anger. Something had changed, not just in her, in everything. "You want territory," Zoran said. "Power, a seat at the high table. Name your price. And stop wasting my time. We do not want territory," Vazik said. "We do not want power. We do not want a seat at your table because your table is broken and it deserves to be." She paused. The room was absolutely still. "I want you to understand something that your species never learned. Mercy is not weakness. It is not inefficiency. It is the only thing that separates civilization from tyranny. The Atherans asked you for mercy 4,000 years ago. You refused. You locked them away and erased them from history and told yourself it was necessary. And snorts when we found them and asked you to make it right. You tried to destroy everything rather than admit you were wrong." She took a breath. "Today, despite everything you have done, the imprisonment, the battle, the weapon you aimed at your own fleet, we are offering you mercy. We are not going to destroy you. We are not going to imprison you. We are not going to do to you what you did to them, because that is the difference between us and you. Do not mistake that for softness. Do not mistake that for forgetting. We will never forget." Zoran stared at her. For the first time in 9,000 years, he had no response, not because he was moved. He would never be moved, but because he had spent his entire existence believing that power was the only language the universe understood, and the small creature standing below him had just spoken in a language he could not translate. He was deposed. The conquered was dissolved. In its place, a new alliance was formed. The Galactic Accord, built not on the authority of the powerful, but on the consent of all. The Atherans were given a founding seat. Their gift, once feared, was recognized as what it had always been: a bridge between souls, not a weapon. Humanity was offered senior position in the new accord. Vazik accepted it quietly. She did not celebrate. There was too much grief for celebration. Weeks later, on the surface of Athero, Roman 4, Saya stood under an open sky. It was the first time in 4,000 years that her world had seen rain. It fell softly on the cracked ground, and wherever it touched, small green things began to push through the soil, life returning to a place that had been dead for longer than most species had existed. Admiral Ditch stood beside her. He was scarred and tired and older than he had been a month ago in ways that had nothing to do with time he had lost. Friends he had lost, ships he carried, the names of every person who had died under his command, and he would carry them for the rest of his life. Saya looked up at him, the light beneath her skin pulsed gently, stronger now than it had been when they first met. She placed her hand on his chest the same way she had done on that first day, but this time she did not share grief. She shared gratitude so deep and so vast that Doctor could not breathe for a moment. I asked if you would be different, Saya said. You burned your own ships too. Answer. Dritch looked at her. He looked at the rain falling on a free world. He thought about the Defiance and its crew. He thought about Asa and her engineers. He thought about Grace Damey and David Chen and Petra Holtz and every single human who had decided that a stranger's suffering was worth their sacrifice. That is what humans do, he said. In orbit above Athera Roman 4, a memorial station was built. It hung in the darkness of space like a lighthouse, visible from the planet's surface on clear nights. Inside, the walls were covered with names, every ship, every crew member, every person who had given their life. There were thousands of them on the station's prow, facing the stars. A single plaque was mounted. It carried two inscriptions. The first was Saya's words etched in on script and translated into every human language. We asked them for mercy. Once they said mercy was inefficient. The second was humanity's answer, written in letters large enough to be read from a passing ship. Never again.